You know, I recently got around to thinking about how much I love a good single player game. I don't really know what it is about them, possibly the countless hours of entertainment and interaction that you can't get by simply watching a movie, or maybe how everything seems to be in your control when you play them. You feel like the outcome of the story is actually dependent on your actions and how well you progress through the game, even though that might not necessarily be true. And I realized that part of the reason that I enjoy playing these games so much is because of the story itself and the characters within it. You kind of grow attached to these people as you see them grow and mature, and it really does have an effect on you. And part of the reason that it's able to have such an effect is because these characters have distinct personalities that allow you to get to know them like you know a friend in real life. And more often than not, even the character you play as has a distinct personality that you grow attached to as the game progresses. Sort of acting like your companion or guide throughout the story as you take control of their actions and do what you think they should do. For example, when you play through the Uncharted series, you become accustomed to Nathan Drake's sarcastic and completely nonchalant nature. He drops some of the most hilarious one-liners you thought couldn't exist in a video game, and always at the perfect time. So even when you're playing through something boring or distressful, he still finds a way to spin a bit of personality on it to make things more interesting. And after some time, you get to know him so well that seeing him succeed is like seeing yourself succeed. And there is no feeling like seeing yourself succeed in a video game. Like back in 2013 when The Last of Us came out, we all spent upwards of 15 hours struggling with both Joel and Ellie going through things that no human being should ever have to. But those events made them stronger, and us watching them trudge through their tribulations made us grow closer to them and their journeys end that much sweeter. Or even Henry and Delilah from Firewatch, two broken human beings that over time slowly began to help each other accept their respective pasts, all through a little handheld radio where they communicate. Seeing those two characters grow to live again, free of their shackles, albeit for a short moment, reminded us as the player what it feels to be alive and free of the judgments of modern society. And seeing them be set free freed us as the player for a brief moment too. But then there's the most common main character of them all. Nobody. And I quite literally mean nobody. I've noticed a rather alarming trend in the video game industry that's quite frankly upsetting me to say the least, and it's growing rather rapidly among some of the bigger publishers like Activision, Blizzard, EA, Bethesda, Ubisoft, etc. It's the trend of having a customizable main character in what is supposed to be a story-driven game. It's become a feature of most titles that often leads to taking away more from the story than it has to offer, because a lot of the time these main characters aren't even voiced and have no real purpose in the story besides standing there and being your spiritual avatar. And even when they are voiced, their dialogue is often limited and two-dimensional to account for the potential difference of the people who might be behind the controller, because if it's your character, he or she wouldn't want to say anything that you wouldn't say yourself. But that creates a rather large issue, because obviously studios can't account for how every individual who plays their game might feel about any particular situation, so they've essentially forced themselves in between a rock and a hard place. In their quest to make main characters as relatable as possible through customization and self-projection, they have in turn made them unrelatable. Because obviously, if you couldn't tell already, a character who is relatable to everyone is thus relatable to no one. And although that may sound counterintuitive, it's due to a simple reason. That being, we as a species only share a select number of things that we can collectively say that all 7.8 billion of us have. Most of us have 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 feet, but even then that's not enough. Most isn't enough. We all have a brain, a heart, at least 1 kidney, and whatever vital organ you can't survive without. But just because someone else has a heart or brain doesn't necessarily mean you'll be inclined to feel a relation to them. And I think that's what most video game developers have seemingly forgotten. As sad as it may be, if you try to appeal to too broad an audience, you'll end up appealing to nobody. Like in Far Cry 5, just because the character I created decided to put an end to an uber-religious cult that had been corrupt with power, doesn't mean I'll like him or her. Because any sane person given the power and moxie would have chosen to do the same thing in one way or another, because we obviously don't like uber-religious murderous cults. So it's clear that somewhat of a problem has been brewing in the single player community for quite a while now, and has been taking away a lot of the fun that usually comes with playing through a single player game, and it's making it harder to relate to and create more memorable main characters. So why was it implemented? Why was this seemingly contradictory and detrimental system introduced? Well, I think at first, part of the reason was just the initial awe at the fact that you could play it as quote-unquote yourself in a video game, but after that amazement wore off, so should have this gimmick, but it stayed around. Now, part of me wants to believe that it's because game studios simply got lazy and decided that creating a main character that required little to no dialogue and rigging would save them tons of money, and don't get me wrong, it probably did, but I think it has a lot more to do with representation. As the gaming community becomes bigger and bigger, it's obvious to assume that a larger variety of people will begin to pick it up and call it their own, just like many of us did long ago. But that's a big problem, because as more and more people enter the gaming scene, it becomes harder and harder to please everyone within it. So obviously, following a lot of complaints involving a lack of representation that seemingly plagued all of 2016, I'm sure a lot of studios felt that customizable characters would be a great solution. Because what better person to build a character that you like than you yourself? And for its time, it actually wasn't a bad solution at all. Most of us would just hop on, play, and forget all about it. But I guess that was the problem, that we forgot all about it. Because in my opinion, it definitely hasn't aged well. Nowadays, whenever I see a single player game that involves a fully customizable main character, I immediately get the feeling that its story and relationships won't be compelling at all, because you run the risk of misrepresenting the characters built by millions. Because if I, a straight male, built a character that is supposed to be me in video game form, I probably would not feel comfortable watching him go kiss another man against my will. So that avenue is likely going to be taken away from the writers of that video game, and not just that avenue, but literally all avenues that define us as individual people. The only way to make the customizable main characters work is to make them not individual. But then we come full circle and swiftly realize that if they are not at least a little individual, nobody is going to care about them and possibly forget about them and the whole story in the long run. Because when you introduce a customizable main character, the writers have no choice but to limit your interactions with other characters to platonic friendships in hopes of keeping you immersed and not overstepping any bounds that may de-immerse any one group. And like I've been hinting toward this entire video, that's just not good writing at all. So now, how do we fix this? How do we keep full representation of ourselves in video games without sacrificing the experience of a meaningful story and main character? Well, long story short, I don't think we can fix it. The two sides just contradict each other far too much, but that doesn't mean we can't improve the landscape of single player gaming as a whole, however. And what I mean by that is simply 3 things, as in 3 things developers can do right now that could improve the situation significantly. Number 1, limit the amount of times fully customizable characters are used in story-driven games. This is pretty straightforward and will simply keep the amount of times where we see these characters to a minimum, especially if the game is story and not gameplay driven. And notice I excluded games that are based on gameplay. Let's take the Far Cry series for example. There once was a time where Far Cry could have been considered a mix of both story and gameplay, but now, especially with the release of Far Cry 5 as well as New Dawn, it's obvious that the developers are starting to tilt more towards gameplay and immersion of the open world through things like lore and side quests. So for games like this, it's not a major problem if you have a fully customizable character, since it wasn't particularly story-centric in the first place. But then again, you could make the argument that the reason it's not story-centric is because of the customizable main character and how he/she makes it harder for the writers to make a more compelling narrative and blah 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 blah. But we're not going to get into that because it's literally just a catch-22. Number 2, when using a customizable character, do what Cyberpunk 2077 seems to be doing and give them a personality regardless. Meaning, just make the appearances customizable, but try not to let it affect your writing, because from what we've seen in Cyberpunk 2077, V, whether they're male or female, seem to be the exact same person nonetheless. A witty, demanding, and nonchalant human being who has a serious vendetta against the corporate entities of the cyberpunk world. Like both versions of the character, regardless of how you choose to dress them or make them look, seem to have a vivid and unique personality. So I doubt having a customizable character in this situation would take too much from the story, and honestly, it's CD Projekt Red, so of course they'd figure it out. And finally, number 3, create games that have a variety of different main characters, and this is probably the most important one. And let me be clear, I'm not saying, make a game just to make a game. Make sure our agenda of representation gets across. No, that's a really stupid statement. You shouldn't infiltrate an entire culture of people like gaming and try to morph it into something that it isn't when you aren't even interested in pursuing that culture yourself. Basically what I'm saying is, start making great games that employ a wide variety of characters, because if you're a fan of games, you'll play a great game regardless of who was cast the lead role. But we can't say the same for newer gamers. They'll probably tend to gravitate towards games that more heavily focus on their own interests and not the recommendations of others. So we need a proper entry point for all, as well as a constant flow of content. Because it's unlikely that my younger sister would be more interested in playing Uncharted with Nathan Drake or God of War with Kratos instead of Tomb Raider with Lara Croft or Horizon Zero Dawn with Aloy. And sadly, that's just how implicit bias works. People are more likely to play games or consume content that they can relate to, and having a main character that embodies that is a good start. And nobody, regardless of your interests, could really call any of these bad games. In fact, they were all quite amazing. So even if I, a young male, don't relate to Aloy as much as my younger sister could, it's not like I'll enjoy the story any less because it was built around Aloy and her journeys, and I can enjoy a beautiful work of art regardless of its direct relation to me. I mean, I don't think any of us are fighting robotic dinosaurs, so that goes twicefold for anyone watching this video. So the biggest thing thus becomes to create more meaningful, and the keyword there is meaningful, games that employ a wide cast of characters that actually have a story to tell. Like I said earlier, you shouldn't make or complain about games just to make or complain about games. You're just gonna get everybody mad doing that. Because I think we as gamers have come to the consensus that characters like Lara Croft, Aloy, Max from Life is Strange, and Ellie from The Last of Us are all phenomenal characters, and they prove that people are willing to play through games with main characters that are nothing like themselves. All you have to do is create a story worth telling and people will play. And this goes for both sides of the coin. Once a new gamer has been assimilated into our culture, they'll play whatever is good regardless of the main character. So the number one goal should then become making great games, and that's it. Just make great games, and I doubt anyone will care about the intricacies of it all. So finally, now that I've said all this, you might be wondering, then what is the point of fully customizable characters in story-driven games? They are killing the potential for possibly great main characters to take their place. And honestly, that's something I'm still trying to figure out, and will probably never be answered. But as of right now, for every game where a customizable character is the lead role, just know that a main character is dead. Anyways lads, that's gonna bring us to the end of the video. If you liked it, leave a like. If you disliked it, dislike, and consider subscribing if you're so inclined. I like posting all sorts of content here, so you'll be bound to find something that you enjoy. But again, I've been Innocence, you've been the audience, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.